So recently Firebase introduced version 9 of the library, and the way we use version 9 is a bit different to how we've been using Firebase in the past with previous versions. But before I get into those differences and talk about them, I wanted to give everyone who's completely new to Firebase a whirlwind tour of what it is. So Firebase is what's known as a backend as a service, and that means that it provides backend services like a database, authentication, file storage, cloud functions, hosting, and other things as well, and we can plug those services directly into our front-end applications or websites to make use of them. And Firebase then takes care of all of the server-side logic and heavy lifting so that we as developers don't need to focus much on it at all. So it's an alternative to setting up our own backend infrastructure using tools like MongoDB and a Node.js server. So instead, Firebase handles all of that for us, and we can focus more on the front end of our app somewhere. And once you've done that, you should see a link, and your Firebase console is where all of your Firebase projects are listed. Generally speaking, for each different website or application that you create, you normally have a new Firebase project for. Between major change in version 9 of Firebase is that it now adopts a more modular and functional approach, meaning that we only import the Firebase functions that we need from the libraries and not those we don't need. In contrast, version 8 used a more object-oriented approach where we call those functions or methods directly on Firebase objects. But by using a more functional approach and only importing the functions that we need, we can take advantage of something called tree shaking, which is where any unused code or functions can be removed from our final bundled JavaScript file. To do that, we'll need to use a module bundler like Webpack or Rollup, but we'll talk more about that in the next lesson. For now, the main takeaway point is that using Firebase 9 in this functional way means more optimized output code and a smaller file size. Now, if we quickly take a look at the code examples on the Firebase docs, we can see the difference in how we use Firebase 8 and 9 by switching between the two tabs. And you'll notice that when we select version 9, the individual functions that we need are imported from the Firebase libraries. But when we select version 8, the functions are called directly on the Firebase object. So this is the major difference between how Firebase versions 8 and 9 differ. And we'll be seeing how to use version 9 using the Firestore database and the Firebase auth service in this series. First up though, we need to set up a module bundler like Webpack in order to use the new Firebase version and take advantage of that tree shaking feature. But just two more things really quickly before we start. First of all, I've created course files for this series, and you can find them at this repo right here, Getting Started with Firebase 9. So the link to this is going to be down below, and there's a different branch for every lesson in this series. So if you want to see the code for lesson 7, for example, select the lesson 7 branch and you're going to see all the code and folders right here. If you want to download a zip folder of this lesson, you can do that by clicking on this button and then going to download zip. Alright, so also you'll need Node.js installed on your computer for this course as well. So if you don't have it installed already, go to nodejs.org and then download this version right here. By the way, if you want to watch this entire course now without YouTube adverts, you can do. It's all up on the NetNinja website, netninja.dev. You can buy the course for $2 to get instant access to all of it, or you can sign up to NetNinja Pro and get instant access to all of my courses without adverts, as well as premium courses not found on YouTube, including my Udemy ones. That's $9 a month, and you can get your first month half price when you use this promo code right here. So I'm going to leave this link down below in the video description for you to sign up, and I really hope you enjoy this series, and please do not forget to share, subscribe, and like the videos.
Hi guys, so if you are from Indonesia and if you want to work remotely and earn
to remove any unused code, we need to use a module bundler like Webpack, because it's the module bundler that bundles our different pieces of imported source code together into a final JavaScript bundle file. And it's that JavaScript bundle that we link to from our HTML page. Now, if you're creating your website with a CLI tool like Create React App or the Vue CLI or something like that, then most of the time Webpack or another module bundler is automatically set up for you. So in those cases, you won't need to manually set it up yourself, and you can go right ahead and just start using Firebase 9 from the get-go. However, If you're not using a CLI tool to build your site and you're just making a regular site using HTML and vanilla JavaScript, then you'll need to set up a module bundler yourself. Now, I don't want to assume that you're using a CLI tool like the Vue CLI or Create React App to build your website. So I'll be showing you how to set up Webpack to bundle our code in this lesson. And then in the next lesson, we'll start to use Firebase 9. So if you want to skip this lesson, if you already know how to do this, then be my guest. So I've already got open a project folder in VS Code which has nothing in it at all to begin with. The first thing I'm going to do is create a source folder, which is where all of our source JavaScript code is going to live. And inside that, I'm going to make a new index.js file, which will be our JavaScript entry file. So this is the file that we'll be writing all of our JavaScript code in later on. The next thing I'll do is create a dist folder. Now, this is where our final bundled JavaScript code is going to live, and we'll specify that to Webpack shortly. Also inside this folder, I'm going to create an index.html file. This will be the web page that we serve to the browser, and we'll hook that up later to our bundled JavaScript file. So we don't link to the source JavaScript file from here, but to a bundled one when we have it. Now, inside the HTML file, I'm just going to boilerplate a page by typing doc and then hitting tab. Then I'm just going to update the title to say Firebase 9. And also, I'm going to add an H1 in the body. And that's going to say something like getting started with Firebase 9. The next thing we need to do is install Webpack and configure it. To do this, we'll be using npm, the Node Package Manager, so it's important at this point to make sure you have Node.js installed on your computer. If you don't, then you can download it and install it at nodejs.org. Once you've done that, you can open up a terminal, and we're going to type npm init and then -y. This is going to create a new package.json file to keep track of all of our different dependencies that we need to install, and one of those is going to be Webpack. So let's do that. So we need to install Webpack, but also the Webpack CLI. So type now npm I for install, then Webpack, and then webpack-CLI, and then at the end do -d, capital D, to save this to our dev dependencies. So we're installing two packages here, right? Webpack itself and also the Webpack CLI, which is going to be used to run Webpack. So now that's done, we can go ahead and make a new Webpack config file inside the root of our project directory. So not inside the source folder or the dist folder, but in the root project folder. Now, inside this file is where we configure what we want Webpack to do. What we want it to do is look at our source index.js file and any imports that we have in there later as well, and then bundle all of that code together into a single bundle file. So to do this, we need to export an object which represents our Webpack configuration. Now, I don't want to waste your time by typing all of this configuration out from scratch. So what I'm now going to do is just copy this from the course files and paste it in, and then I'll explain it line by line. So then, first off, we have this module.export, and we export an object from this file. And inside this object, there's different properties which represent the configuration of Webpack for us. So first, we specify a mode. Now, that can be production for production, but we're just developing, so I've specified development. Then we have an entry property, and this is the entry file that we need to specify a path to it. And that says where we want Webpack to initially look for our JavaScript source file. So we say inside the source folder, then index.js. Now we have an output property, and this is an object. Now the first property of that object is a path. So it's a path to whatever folder or directory we want the output file to be put into. Now we want it to be inside the dist folder. Now, in order to create this path, we need to use the path module right here. So we require that. That is a core node module. And then we use that and a method called resolve on that path object to resolve a new path. This __dir name basically just gets the current directory of this file, and then we say go into the dist folder from here. And this is required because we need an absolute path right here, not a relative one, unlike this. All right, so after we have the path, we also specify a file name for the output file, which I've called bundle.js. And then finally, after the output property, we have a watch property, which I set to be true. And this is so that when we run Webpack, it's going to watch our file over here, And every time we make a change, it's going to bundle up the new code into the bundle.js file. So then we will run Webpack, and it will take the source file and any imports inside this file as well. It will bring those in as well and bundle them all together and spit it out inside the dist folder into a file called bundle.js. And like I said, every time we make a change, if you wish, and then for that we just set it to be Webpack, or forget to save it. But later on we'll be using file imports in here to import functions from the Firebase library, and that's where the power of module bundle is come into play. For now, I just want to see if this process is all going to work. So now I'll open up a terminal, and I'm going to run our new script by typing npm run and then the name of the script, which is build. And when I do that, Webpack will take our source code and it's going to bundle it into the output file inside the dist folder, and we can see it right there. And it's also going to be what make a change and then save the file. Now remember, we also need to flag and set the source to be bundle.js. So now if we preview this in a browser, it should show live server, which you can install by going to your packages and then searching for live server. And it's this package that you want right here. Open up the dev tools, then we can see over in the console file, which we've linked to. Right then, so now we have Webpack set up. The next thing we need to do is create a new Firebase project. So go to your Firebase console at console.firebase.google.com, and then we want to add in a new project, and we need to give this a name. I'm going to call it Firebase 9 Dojo. You can call it what you want, it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to click on continue. We don't need analytics, so just click on create project. Alright, and then click on continue to go to the project dashboard. Now when we create a new Firebase project, we have to make a new front-end application for the project as well. This is the dashboard where we can control the back end, but we need to register a front end, our application. Now we can have different types of applications. We're going to have a web app, so click on this right here, give it a name. Really doesn't matter what it is. Again, I'm going to call it Firebase 9 Dojo website, something like that. We don't need to set up hosting. Register the application first of all. Then it's telling us what we need to do next. Now, all we want to do for now is just go down to continue to console, because we're going to grab this code from somewhere else. So click on continue to console, and now we can see this new app that we've just created. So this represents the front-end application, our website, if you like, that's going to connect to this back-end, this Firebase project. So click on the cog for this to go to the settings, and then if we scroll down, we want to grab the config object. So click on config right here, and you want to copy this object. Now this config object contains information about our Firebase project, and we need to use it on our front end so that the front end website can connect to our Firebase project and interact with it. So copy that. Alright, and then back in our project, inside the index.js file, I'm going to get rid of this console log right here, and instead I'm going to paste in this new Firebase config object. Alright, so we have this config object, but it's not really doing much at the minute, and we need to basically connect to the Firebase project on the back end from the front end using this object right here. Now the first step in doing that is to install Firebase. So I'm going to open up my terminal again. We still have Webpack running inside this terminal. I'm going to click on this one to open a new one. And then over here, we need to install Firebase. So I'm going to say npm install Firebase like so. And this should install the latest version of Firebase, version 9 in our case. Alright then, so now that Firebase package is installed, we can go ahead and use it to connect to the Firebase backend along with our Firebase config object. Now, before I show you how to do this using version 9, which is what we've installed, I just want to remind you how we did this using a previous version, like version 8, for example. Now, to do that, we would have said import Firebase from Firebase/app. Now, this Firebase/app is the core part of the Firebase library. And this Firebase object that we import will contain a load of different methods that we would use to basically connect to Firebase and initialize different services. So if I wanted to initialize the app or the connection to the Firebase backend, I would say Firebase and then use a method on that Firebase object called initialize app, like so. And then we would pass in the Firebase config object so it knows what project to connect to. All right, so we'd use a method on the Firebase object. Now in version 9, we don't do this. We just import the functions that we need to use from the library. So in our case, the function we need to use is this, initialize app. So we will get rid of this Firebase thing right here, and instead we will just import a single function from this library, and that is initialize app, like so. And then we don't need to call that method on the Firebase object, we just invoke the function that we import right here. And now that connects us to our Firebase backend using this Firebase config so it knows which project to connect to. And that's all there is to it. So there's your first kind of glance into how we're using these different functions from the Firebase library. Next up, I'm going to show you how we can set up a Firestore database, connect to it, and then get data from it. Alright then gang, so now we've connected to our Firebase backend over here. The next thing we want to do is set up a database and then connect to that database from our front end so that we can reach out and grab data from it. So the first thing we need to do is enable that database on the back end. So you can see we have all of these different features right here. The one we want at the minute is the Firestore database. There is this older real-time database as well, but we're going to use this one right here. So click on Firestore database, and then when this page loads, you're going to see a create database button. So click on that and then make sure you start in test mode, otherwise you won't be able to access your data. Now, this is all to do with Firestore rules, and I'm not going to delve into those in this series, but I will do a complete series in the future all about Firestore rules. So make sure you're in test mode and then click on next. Choose a Firestore location and then click on enable. And now we can see it's created this database for us. All right, so this database is split up into collections and documents. So we would have a collection of a certain data type. For example, in this little application or website that I'm going to make, we're just going to have a data type called books, and they would all be in a collection called books. So I could create that. I'd give this a collection, an ID or a name. I'm going to call it books. And then when we create that, it's asking us to also create a first document inside this collection. Now, each document has to have a document ID so that later on, if we want to grab a single document from the database, we use the ID to get it. Now, I'm going to click on this so that Firebase automatically generates the ID for me, a unique one. All right, and then inside this document, we have different properties and values. Now, the property is called a field in Firestore. So, for example, I could have a title of a book, right? And the title could be The Name of the Wind. So that's the title of the book. And by the way, we'd specify the data type right here. Now, we're sticking with string. I can add a new field, for example, author as well. And I would say that is Patrick Rothfuss. Like so. So I'm going to save that, and it should create a new document with the ID inside this book's collection. And we see the two different properties of that document right here. So what I'm going to do now is add a couple more documents, but I'm going to speed this up so you don't have to watch me do it in real time. Alright then, so now we have our Firestore database set up and we've created a few documents inside that Firestore database. Next, I'm going to show you how we can connect this database from the front end, our website, and reach out and grab these different documents so that we can do something with them. Alright, so first off, you can see I've added in a few different comments, and these comments are what we're going to do in this lesson right here. This one is just for initializing the app to begin with. Alright, so the first step is to actually connect or initialize the Firestore service on the front end so we can connect to it. Now to do that, we need to import a function from the Firestore part of the Firebase library. So we say import, then curly braces. Now I'm going to be importing many things inside the next few videos. So what I'm going to do is place them on different lines for each video so they don't go off the screen and way over to the right and we can't see them. So the function we want to initialize the Firestore service on the front end is called get Firestore, and that will be a pattern for the different services that Firebase provides us with. If it was auth that we wanted to initialize, it would be get auth. All right, so you'll see that kind of get and then the service name pattern. So that's a function, and it comes from Firebase / Firestore, because this is the service we're using. So all we have to do is invoke this function right here to initialize the service. So I'm going to say const db is equal to get Firestore, like so. And this db is for database, and it represents our database connection, which we're kind of storing in this constant now. And anytime we do something with the database, like reach out to get data, we're going to use this constant right here to do it. Okay, so we've initialized the Firestore service. The next thing we need to do is get a reference to a specific collection in our database. So it's almost like us reaching in a hand and grabbing hold of a specific collection that we want to get data from. And that's called a collection reference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a constant called colref, and that stands for collection ref. Now we need to import a function in order to get a reference to a specific collection, and that function is just collection, and it comes from the Firestore part of the library. So we say collection down here, and we invoke that. Then as a first argument, we pass through the database. So we know what database to look in for the collection. And as a second argument, we say we want the books collection. Now, if you've used previous versions of Firebase, already this is going to look quite different, because previously we might initialize Firestore a slightly different way. We would say something like this, firebase.firestore to initialize it, and then also, oops, not config right here, and also we would store that in a constant as well. So const db is equal to firebase.firestore. And then we would say something like db.collection and then books to get a reference to the books collection. So this is older versions of Firestore. We just import a function to do that. And that function is called getDocs. So if I come down here, all I need to do is say getDocs, like so, and we pass in the collection ref as an argument. So paste that in. And what this does is go out, look at this collection, and try to retrieve all the documents inside that collection. Now this returns a promise, so we can tack on a then method which fires a function when this task is complete, and this function is going to contain a snapshot of that collection at that moment in time when we reach out to get it, and on that snapshot object we have access to all of the documents. So what I'm going to do to begin with is just say console.log snapshot and then use a property called docs, which represent all of the documents. So I'm going to save this now so that we can preview it in a browser. Alright, so now in the browser we can see this array right here of 3 different things, and each of these different objects right here represents a document inside that Firestore collection. Remember, I created 3 documents, right? And we've grabbed all of those 3 documents right here. Now, if we open up each one, there's loads of different properties and also methods on this object. Now, we're not interested in most of this stuff. All we want is the data and maybe the ID of the document as well. Now, the data is grabbed by using a data function right here. So we need to call the data function on each of our documents right here to actually get a data object that contains the title and also the author of each document, right? And then we can also grab the ID property of each document as well. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to cycle through these different documents right here using a for each loop, and I'm just going to grab the data I want from each of those documents so that we can output it in a more elegant way. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to get rid of that console log right here, and instead I'll create a new variable using let, because we're going to change this, and it's going to be called books, and we'll set it equal to be an empty array to begin with. Then what I'm going to do is cycle through the docs on the snapshot right here so that I can add my own custom object which represents each document or each book inside this array. So what I'll say is snapshot.docs and then use the for each method to cycle through those. And then each time around we fire a function for each item. Now we take in that document right here. So I'm just going to call that doc. And then we can do something with that doc each time around. All I want to do is get some data from it and then push that to the array. So I will say books.push, and we're going to push an object to the array each time. So each book is represented by an object. Now, what I want to do is get the data from the document. And remember, the data is the title and the author properties. Now, like I said a minute ago, the way we get the data is by using a data method on the doc object right here. So I can say doc.data to get that. And that returns an object with the different data properties, the title and the author object. And for a bit for each loop, all I want to... All right then. So catch, fire. There won't be one because preview this. Alright, so now in the console we can still see an array of 3 items, each one representing a bulk. Now with method we used, and in fact we will need that in the next